She was supposed to pour champagne, not bare her soul, but Esther forced her pregnant maid into the spotlight. Vivian's lips trembled as whispers spread. Then Samuel moved, and in one breath he risked destroying everything. Gasps tore through the ballroom when the bride sneered at her maid, swollen belly showing, and shoved the microphone into her hands. Vivian froze, shame boiling. But Samuel's next move threatened to detonate a secret no one was ready for. Guests expected vows, not scandal, but Esther demanded her maid speak, knowing the world was watching. Vivian trembled under the lights. Then Samuel rose, and his decision could either save her or ruin them all. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. On Thursday, the 14th of August 2025, the ballroom of Claridge's in Mayfair glowed like a chandelier in overdrive. The Times had dubbed it a marriage to cement dynasties. Billionaire Samuel Roberts was marrying Esther Sinclair, now Esther Roberts, a woman as ambitious as she was photogenic. It was the 6th of December 2021, a Monday evening that clung to the bones with cold. The streets of Leeds were slick with rain, and Vivian Donnell, barely 21, drove home from her part-time shift at Tesco. Her old Vauxhall coughed like an asthmatic with each turn of the key, but she cranked the heater and hummed along to the radio anyway. That night she told her mother over the phone, "Mum, one day I'm going to be a teacher. Not a cashier, not a maid, not invisible. I'll stand in front of a classroom and teach." Her mother, a nurse with hands cracked from sanitizers and endless night shifts, had chuckled softly. "I believe you, love. But remember, life doesn't always keep the promises it makes." Life didn't just break promises. It twisted them into knives. By the spring of 2023, Vivian had fallen in love with a man who smelled like cheap aftershave and spoke like a poet after 3 pints. He was no poet, of course. He was a delivery driver with a knack for promises he never intended to keep. By October that year, Vivian was pregnant, and by Christmas, the man was gone, vanished like smoke, leaving her with nothing but morning sickness and unpaid bills. Her dreams of teaching withered beneath the weight of reality. The university library where she once scribbled essays became a place she avoided. Debt collectors phoned more regularly than her friends. By April 2024, Vivian understood something chilling. Dreams were expensive, and she was broke. That was when the agency ad appeared. Domestic staff needed for prestigious London households. Live-in positions. Competitive pay. Discretion essential. Discretion, Vivian thought, was something she had in abundance. Poverty had already taught her silence. She signed the contract that June, catching the coach to London with one suitcase, a half-broken phone, and a belly that had begun to show. Samuel Roberts' Belgravia townhouse was not a home but a fortress of glass and marble. Vivian's first impression in the summer heat of 2024 was that it looked more like a boutique hotel than a family residence. The staff entrance alone had brass handles polished so brightly she could see her reflection. Tired, hopeful, terrified. She met Esther Roberts the very next day. Esther glided into the kitchen in silk robes and diamond earrings that looked too heavy for human ears. She eyed Vivian like one inspects fruit at Harrods, checking for bruises, calculating value. "You're pregnant," Esther said flatly. No greeting. "Yes, ma'am," Vivian replied, clutching her apron like a shield. "Well," Esther sniffed, "at least it will make guests talk." "I suppose you'll do." That set the tone. Esther didn't want staff who blended in. She wanted props that enhanced her performance. She liked her drivers tall, her gardeners foreign, and her maids young enough to look pitiful but strong enough to endure 16-hour days. Vivian, with her swelling belly and quiet obedience, was perfect. Samuel barely looked at her at first. He was a presence more than a man, always on calls, always reading figures, a voice that spoke in numbers rather than words. To him, Vivian might as well have been wallpaper. Or so she thought. By March 2025, Vivian was visibly pregnant, and Esther was visibly delighted. She paraded Vivian at luncheons like a rare pet. Guests would whisper, "Good heavens, she's still working?" Esther would beam and say, "Discipline builds character, doesn't it, Vivian?" Vivian would nod, cheeks burning, while balancing trays with aching arms. At night, she would cry quietly into her thin pillow in the servants' quarters. The irony was rich. Esther fancied herself a champion of women's empowerment on Instagram. She posted captions like, "Queens fix each other's crown sparkles crown," while simultaneously forcing Vivian to polish hers. The hypocrisy was so thick you could spread it on toast. Samuel remained a ghost. He never intervened, never objected. But occasionally, just occasionally, Vivian caught him watching. Not with cruelty, not even with pity, but with a look she couldn't quite name. A mixture of calculation and something gentler. By July 2025, the city buzzed with talk of the wedding. The date was set, August 14th at Claridge's. Esther wanted opulence, Samuel wanted efficiency, and Vivian wanted simply to survive. Yet fate, with its taste for irony, was already sharpening its knives. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Esther's cruelty peaked. She rehearsed her big day like a stage production, screaming at florists, berating designers, and reminding Vivian daily, "Don't think you'll be invisible." People noticed the details, even the ugly ones. Vivian endured it all, each insult carving deeper into her resolve. She carried trays through rehearsals, polished crystal goblets, and tried not to overhear the guests' comments about her belly. But there was a moment, a single fleeting moment in late July, when Samuel surprised her. It was past midnight. Vivian was scrubbing lipstick stains off wine glasses in the pantry when Samuel walked in, still in his suit, tie loosened. He looked exhausted. For the first time, he spoke directly. To her. "Shouldn't you be resting?" he asked. Vivian blinked, unsure if it was a trick. "It's part of the job, sir." He studied her for a long second, then said quietly, "Some jobs take more than they pay." And then he was gone, leaving Vivian rattled. It was the only moment of humanity she'd felt in that house. And it terrified her more than Esther's cruelty. Because kindness, she realized, could be more dangerous than cruelty. It was a Thursday morning, July 31st, 2025, when Esther Roberts gathered the entire staff in the grand dining hall. The mahogany table, usually set with silverware and Bordeaux glasses, was stripped bare. Only Esther stood at the head, dressed in cream silk trousers and heels sharp enough to draw blood. Vivian stood in line with the others. Drivers, cooks, florists, even the new Italian pianist who'd been hired solely to play during cocktail hour. She kept her hands folded over her belly, trying to mask the sharp kick of the child inside her. Esther's voice rang through the room like a sermon. "Perfection," she declared, pacing like a general before her troops, "is not optional. My wedding will not just be an event. It will be a headline. Do you understand?" The staff murmured in unison. Esther smirked. "Vivian," she said suddenly, her eyes landing on the maid like a hawk spotting prey. "Step forward." Vivian obeyed, heart pounding. Esther circled her slowly, her perfume thick with jasmine and judgment. "You are my favorite example," Esther said loudly enough for all to hear. "Pregnant. Exhausted. Ordinary. Yet still working. People will whisper. They'll wonder. They'll admire my generosity for keeping you." She paused, then added with a razor-thin smile, "And my discipline." The staff chuckled nervously. Vivian lowered her gaze. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than words. But Samuel, seated quietly at the far end of the table, scrolling through his phone, finally looked up. His eyes flickered toward Vivian, then back to the glowing screen, as though torn between two worlds. Esther noticed. She always noticed. Life in the Roberts household in the days before the wedding was not unlike military training. Every hour was scheduled, every mistake punished. Vivian rose at dawn to polish glassware, scrub marble floors, and carry platters twice her weight. By noon, her back ached so fiercely she sometimes hid in the laundry room to breathe. One afternoon, while steaming Esther's gown, Vivian overheard her on the phone. "Yes, August 14th at Claridge's." "No, it's not just a wedding, darling, it's an empire showcase. Samuel's investors will be there, and so will the press. Every detail matters. Even the maid." Vivian froze. Even the maid. The realization sank in. She was not just background decoration. She was a prop in Esther's carefully staged theater of power. A pregnant maid, sweating through silk and diamonds, would make Esther look magnanimous, tolerant, even saintly. The thought made Vivian's stomach churn harder than morning sickness ever had. On August 5, 2025, something happened that shifted the air in the Roberts home. Esther was in the salon, rehearsing vows with her wedding planner, when Samuel walked in. He glanced at Vivian, who was kneeling to pick up shards of a broken champagne flute, and spoke with quiet irritation. "Esther, enough. You don't need to use her like this." The room stilled. Esther's head snapped around, eyes narrowing. "Use her?" she repeated, her voice like ice cracking. "She is staff, Samuel. Paid staff. You of all people should understand value." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He turned and left, leaving the echo of his footsteps to fill the silence. For the first time, Vivian saw something fracture in Esther's flawless mask. Not insecurity. Esther was allergic to that, but suspicion. The kind of suspicion that lingers, sharpens, festers. From that day, Esther's gaze on Vivian became heavier. Not just cruel but watchful, calculating. Despite the cruelty, small sparks of absurdity lit the servants' quarters at night. The cook Marta often cracked jokes about Esther's obsession with image. "Imagine her in Apocalypse," Marta whispered once, peeling potatoes. Bombs falling, city burning, and she still shouting, "Polish the Silva." Even Vivian laughed, though softly, holding her side from the stitch of it. In the darkness of their small, windowless room, laughter was rebellion. But rebellion, even whispered, had a cost. The very next day, Esther announced at breakfast, "Vivian, you'll be doing something special for us at the wedding." Vivian froze, spoon halfway to her lips. "Special, ma'am." "Yes," Esther said sweetly, though her smile was poison. "You'll give a speech." The room went silent. The butler nearly dropped his tray. "A speech?" Vivian stammered. "Yes," Esther repeated, leaning back like a queen on her throne. "What could be more charming than a poor pregnant maid thanking us, publicly, for our generosity? The press will love it. And don't worry," she added with mock sympathy. "I'll write every word for you." Vivian's heart plummeted. It wasn't a request. It was a command. That night, as she lay awake in the tiny servant's bed, Vivian placed a hand over her stomach. The baby kicked, as if sensing her fear. She whispered, "I don't know what's coming, but I'll protect you." And yet, in the quiet hours before dawn, she realized something terrifying. Esther didn't just want to use her. She wanted to humiliate her. Publicly. Permanently. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. Because the very stage Esther was setting for Vivian's humiliation would become the very stage where Samuel Roberts would make a choice that shocked everyone. By August 10, 2025, London was buzzing with whispers about the upcoming Roberts wedding. The tabloids called it the union of empire and elegance. The Financial Times speculated about the billions tied to Samuel Roberts' latest acquisitions, while Vogue predicted Esther's gown would set a new standard for bridal couture. Behind those glossy headlines, however, the Roberts mansion on Kensington Palace Gardens was more like a pressure cooker. Staff rushed through the halls like soldiers preparing for war, arranging flowers, unpacking crystal, ironing linens worth more than a year's wages. And in the middle of it all was Vivian Donnell, the pregnant maid who had somehow become the centerpiece of a spectacle she never asked for. It was a Sunday morning when Esther gathered Vivian in the library for what she called rehearsals. The room smelled of old leather and roses, a place meant for scholars, not stagecraft. Esther handed Vivian a neatly typed sheet of paper. The title at the top read, "A Testimony of Gratitude." "Read," Esther ordered, crossing her arms. Vivian's fingers shook as she unfolded the paper. She began softly. "I am honored to serve the Roberts family who have shown me kindness and—" "Stop," Esther interrupted. She marched forward, plucked the sheet from Vivian's hands, and shoved it back. "Project. Smile. Do you think the guests want to see a trembling maid? You're not begging for bread, you're thanking your betters." Vivian's throat tightened. Her baby shifted in her womb, as if recoiling at Esther's words. Again, Esther snapped. So Vivian read again, louder this time, though every syllable burned her tongue. When she finished, Esther clapped once, sharp and cold. Not bad. We'll get there. She smirked, then added, Who knew maids could be taught to perform? Vivian lowered her eyes. Inside, however, something fragile and dangerous was stirring, an ember of resistance. Samuel Roberts, meanwhile, seemed to drift on the edges of the household chaos. To the world, he was the model billionaire, calm, strategic, forever 5 steps ahead. But in private, he appeared distracted, as though carrying a weight heavier than the empire he managed. On August 11th, during a late-night meeting with his financial advisors, Samuel excused himself early. Instead of heading to bed, he wandered into the servants' quarters. There, he found Vivian sitting alone, her head resting against the wall, eyes closed. She startled when she saw him. "Sir." "Vivian," he said softly. I heard Esther wants you to speak." She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. He hesitated, then added, "If you don't want to." "Do I have a choice?" she whispered. Their eyes met. For the first time, Samuel seemed to see her, not as staff, not as a pawn in Esther's theater, but as a woman carrying both life and burden. Something flickered in his gaze. Guilt, or maybe something more dangerous. But before he could answer, footsteps echoed in the hall. "Esther." Samuel straightened instantly, mask back in place, and muttered, "Get some rest." Then he left, just as Esther's shadow fell across the doorway. The closer the wedding drew, the more the mansion felt like a gilded cage of secrets. Servants whispered in corridors about Esther's cruelty, Samuel's silence, and Vivian's looming humiliation. Marta, the cook, joked one night over burnt toast crusts. "Esther doesn't want a wedding. She wants a Netflix series. Only difference is Netflix would pay us better." The butler replied deadpan, "At least Netflix lets the extras sit down." Vivian laughed, though her chest ached from holding so much fear inside. But she also noticed something peculiar. The staff weren't just gossiping anymore. They were watching her. With sympathy, with worry, sometimes even with pity. Vivian realized she was no longer invisible. And that terrified her. On August 12th, 2 days before the ceremony, Vivian was summoned to assist with Esther's final dress fitting. The gown, a creation flown in from Paris, was a cathedral of lace and silk, heavy with pearls. Esther stood on the pedestal, radiant and ruthless, while seamstresses circled her like bees. "Vivian," Esther called suddenly. "Come closer. Hold the train." Vivian obeyed, lifting the silk carefully. Esther turned her head slightly, watching her in the mirror. "Do you know why I chose you?" Esther asked, her voice soft but sharp. Vivian froze. "Ma'am." "For the speech," Esther said. Her eyes glinted with something darker than pride. "Because nothing humiliates a woman more than being reminded of her place. And nothing flatters me more than showing the world how charitable I can be." Vivian's grip on the gown tightened. Her stomach turned. Esther smiled sweetly into the mirror. "Don't worry. After the wedding, you'll have plenty of time to rest. Perhaps permanently." The words hung in the air like poison. That night, Samuel sat alone in his office, staring at a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. It was August 12th, 2025, and outside the city hummed with late summer heat. Inside, Samuel's world was unraveling. He thought of Esther, her hunger for image, her cruelty dressed as charm. He thought of Vivian, her trembling voice, her unborn child, her forced role in a show neither she nor the baby deserved. And for the first time in years, Samuel Roberts felt powerless. Or perhaps, dangerously, he was about to stop being silent. By August 13th, the mansion had transformed into a palace of white roses, golden chandeliers, and champagne fountains. Reporters camped outside the gates, eager for photos of arriving dignitaries. The air smelled of wealth and expectation. But in the servants' quarters, Vivian lay awake, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She whispered to her unborn child, "Tomorrow it ends. One way or another. Little did she know, tomorrow wouldn't just end her silence. It would unravel a secret so explosive. The wedding itself would become something no guest would ever forget. It was Friday, August 14th, 2025, a date already inked into the social calendars of London's elite. The Roberts wedding wasn't just an event. It was a production, a performance staged for power brokers, celebrities, and critics eager to feast on the spectacle of wealth. By dawn, helicopters buzzed over Kensington Palace Gardens, capturing aerial shots of the mansion dressed in white roses. Delivery trucks lined the street, spilling out crates of champagne, gilded cutlery, and enough flowers to choke the Thames. Inside, chaos pulsed like an orchestra warming up for its first note. Staff moved in precise rhythms, their uniforms crisp but their nerves frayed. You could smell anxiety in the air, like perfume gone sour. Vivian woke before sunrise, not from the alarm but from the restless kick of her unborn child. She placed her palm over her belly, whispering, "Easy now, today's already heavy enough." Her room, a small chamber tucked at the edge of the servants' wing, was flooded with the muffled sounds of preparations. Laughter, scolding, clattering trays. It was like living inside. The beating heart of a machine she couldn't escape. On her nightstand lay the speech Esther had forced on her, typed neatly on cream paper. A testimony of gratitude. Vivian stared at it as though it were a death sentence. A knock rattled her door. Marta, the cook, barged in with a tray of tea and bread rolls. "Eat," she said firmly. "You'll need your strength." Vivian gave a weak smile. Strength for humiliation. "Strength to survive it," Marta shot back. Then softer. "Vivian, whatever happens today, remember you're more than her pawn." Vivian swallowed hard. For the first time, she wondered if surviving wasn't enough anymore. At precisely 9 a.m., Esther Roberts swept into the great hall like a queen inspecting her empire. She wore a silk robe embroidered with pearls, her hair pinned with diamonds even before makeup began. "Vivian," she called, her voice slicing through the hum of activity. Vivian rushed forward, head lowered. Esther handed her a microphone, not even a prop, but the very one that would be used later. "Hold it. Speak into it." Vivian obeyed, her voice trembling. "Testing, 1, 2. "Pathetic," Esther interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Project, Vivian. This isn't a funeral. You're supposed to glorify us." Her tone was mocking, but her eyes glinted with cruelty. Esther didn't just want obedience, she wanted spectacle. "Again," she ordered. Vivian forced herself louder. "I am honored to." "That will do," Esther said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't ruin my wedding with your stammering, or I'll make sure you regret it." The words dripped like poison into Vivian's ears. Upstairs, Samuel Roberts stood before his mirror, fastening the cufflinks his father had given him years ago. Gold, engraved with the family crest. Symbols of legacy, of power. But his reflection looked foreign to him. Hollow-eyed, weary. His assistant entered, listing last-minute details. The Prime Minister's office confirmed attendance. "Vogue's team wants a photo of you and Esther by the fountain before the ceremony. And the press release about the Roberts Foundation scholarship is..." "Enough," Samuel interrupted. His voice was low but sharp. "Not today." When the assistant left, Samuel sank into the leather chair, his hands clasped tightly. He thought of Esther's icy control, of Vivian's trembling voice, of the child she carried. And for the first time in years, Samuel considered breaking script. By noon, the mansion's gates opened to the glittering tide of guests. Rolls-Royces and Bentleys pulled up, releasing diplomats, movie stars, heirs to old fortunes. Paparazzi flashes painted the air white. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers dripped with crystal light, and an orchestra tuned instruments worth more than the servants' annual salaries. The scent of roses was so thick it felt suffocating. Guests murmured in clusters, gossiping. "They say Esther personally designed every detail. I heard Samuel doubled the security budget. What's he afraid of? And who's that girl, the pregnant one in uniform? Strange she's even visible." Vivian felt the eyes prickling her skin as she carried trays, her belly impossible to hide. The whispers coiled around her like smoke. At one point, Marta muttered under her breath as she passed trays of canapes. "Look at them, nibbling caviar like pigeons pecking crumbs. Rich folks always eat like they're afraid of chewing too loudly." The butler, overhearing, nearly choked trying not to laugh. "Careful, Marta. If Esther hears, she'll have you polishing silver with your tears." Even Vivian cracked a small smile. Brief, fragile but real. Humor was rebellion in miniature. As the clock struck 2, Esther appeared in her gown, an avalanche of silk, pearls, and diamonds. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras clicked like gunfire. She glided to Vivian, leaned in close, and whispered, "Remember your lines. Remember your place. One wrong word and I'll bury you." Her smile for the cameras was radiant, but her words pierced Vivian like knives. By late afternoon, the ceremony was ready to begin. Guests took their seats, the orchestra struck its first chord, and Esther walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Samuel waited at the altar, his jaw set, his eyes unreadable. Vivian stood at the side, clutching the microphone Esther had shoved into her hands earlier. Her heart pounded, her baby kicked, and every nerve screamed to run. But she couldn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't just a wedding. It was the stage for something far bigger. Something that would break before the day was done. And when it did, no one, neither Esther nor Samuel nor Vivian, would leave unchanged. Got it. This is where the story hits its first climax. The ceremony and Vivian's forced speech. Since you asked for it longer, I'll expand Chapter 5 with rich detail. The grandeur of the wedding, the whispers of the guests, Esther's cruelty on full display, Samuel's breaking point, and Vivian's unbearable moment of truth. It was 4 p.m. on August 14, 2025, when the cathedral-like ballroom of the Roberts mansion fell into reverent silence. The orchestra swelled, the chandeliers glowed like 100 captured suns, and Esther Roberts walked down the aisle as if the world itself belonged to her. She was breathtaking in her pearl-crusted gown, every bead catching the light like frozen drops of power. Guests gasped, phones discreetly lifted to snap forbidden pictures, though security swooped quickly to scold them. At the altar, Samuel Roberts waited. His tuxedo was immaculate, his posture perfect, but his eyes betrayed the fracture within. To the cameras, he was the billionaire groom. To himself, he was a man standing on the edge of a cliff. The ceremony unfolded like a well-rehearsed script. The officiant recited blessings. Esther recited her vows with a voice as clear and commanding as a stateswoman. Samuel repeated his, though his words landed flat, as though he were reading numbers off a spreadsheet instead of promising his life. But no one noticed. No one except Vivian Donnell. Standing at the side, microphone clutched in her sweating hands, she saw the truth in Samuel's eyes. He was present in body, but his soul was elsewhere. Trapped, conflicted, dangerous. As the orchestra softened and applause rippled through the guests, Esther turned her head slightly. Her smile was flawless, angelic, but her eyes found Vivian. The signal was unmistakable. No. Vivian's throat closed. Her palms slickened. Her unborn child shifted as if sensing the storm. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the marble floor, but instead she stepped forward as ordered, into the center of the stage. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. "Who is she?" whispered a duchess. "Why is the maid here?" hissed a banker's wife. Cameras tilted discreetly, hungry for scandal. Vivian raised the microphone. Her lips trembled. For a moment, the paper Esther had forced into her hands felt heavier than iron. I am honored," she began softly, "to stand here today." Esther's eyes narrowed. Too quiet. Vivian swallowed and forced herself louder. "To stand here today, in service of the Roberts family. They have shown me kindness, generosity." The words burned like acid in her mouth. The crowd leaned in, some curious, some amused. "And I owe them gratitude for allowing me to be part of their lives." The line Esther had written. A line meant to humiliate, to showcase power. Esther's smile widened. The trap was working. Whispers rippled through the audience. Is she pregnant? Why would Esther make her do this? This is bizarre, even for the Roberts. Some laughed quietly behind jeweled hands. Others shook their heads. The scent of scandal was intoxicating. Vivian felt the weight of every stare. Her vision blurred, her knees buckled slightly. For a second, she feared she might collapse under the pressure. But then she saw Samuel. His jaw was tight, his hand gripping the edge of the altar so hard his knuckles whitened. His eyes locked on hers. Not cold, not mocking, but pleading. Louder, Vivian. Esther called sweetly, her voice carrying across the hall. They can't hear you at the back. Be proud of your service. The guests chuckled nervously. Esther laughed along, as though she were the benevolent queen, raising up her humble maid for applause. It was cruelty dressed in satin. Vivian's stomach twisted. Her baby kicked sharply, as though in protest. And in that instant she realized, this wasn't just humiliation. This was erasure. Esther wasn't trying to showcase kindness. She was trying to make Vivian disappear beneath a mask of obedience. And Vivian couldn't breathe. Her voice faltered mid-sentence. The paper in her hands shook violently. I can't, she whispered, barely audible. The crowd leaned forward, hungry. I can't, Vivian said louder, her eyes filling with tears. I cannot stand here and lie. The room froze. Esther's smile curdled into fury. Vivian, she hissed under her breath. But it was too late. The words were out. The silence was electric, thick enough to choke. And then, before Esther could speak, Samuel did. He stepped forward, his voice slicing the air. Enough. The orchestra stilled. The guests gasped. Esther's face drained of color. Samuel turned to Vivian, then to the crowd. His chest rose and fell, his mask of control shattering. This woman does not owe us gratitude, he declared, his voice trembling with fury and something else, truth. If anything, we owe her. The room erupted in whispers, shock and disbelief bouncing like sparks. Esther's hands tightened around her bouquet until petals snapped. Samuel looked at Vivian again, and for a moment the entire world seemed to tilt. His words hung between them like a loaded gun. And then he said it, words that detonated the room. Because what Esther has tried to hide, he paused, his eyes never leaving Vivian, is that this child she carries is not just hers. The crowd gasped in unison, a wave of shock rolling through the hall. Glasses clinked, someone dropped a phone, the orchestra stuttered into silence. Esther staggered as if slapped. Vivian's heart stopped. The guests leaned forward, ravenous for the truth. And Samuel's next words were about to turn the wedding into war. The words hung in the air like a blade. This child she carries is not just hers. For 3 eternal seconds, the ballroom was suspended in silence. Chandeliers glittered above frozen faces, the orchestra's bows hovered mid-air, and every guest held their breath. Then the whispers erupted. 1,000 murmurs collided into a roar. Did he just say? Impossible. Good Lord, is he admitting? Phones flicked out like daggers, screens glowing as hands scrambled to record the scandal of the decade. Esther Roberts, the bride draped in pearls and vengeance, staggered back. Her bouquet fell, scattering white roses across the marble floor like bones. You dare, she hissed at Samuel, her voice breaking into a shriek. At our wedding. In front of them. Her face, once painted with serenity, contorted into fury. Mascara streaked as her composure cracked for the first time in public. This is slander. Lies, she cried, pointing a trembling finger at Vivian. She's nothing but a maid trying to ruin us. But her voice, shrill and desperate, only added fuel to the fire. The guests were no longer watching a wedding. They were watching a gladiator pit. Vivian Donnell stood frozen, the microphone trembling in her hands. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, her chest tightened as Samuel's words ricocheted through her body. Her child kicked violently, as if stirred by the storm. She wanted to deny it, to vanish, to hide. But every eye was on her, dissecting her silence as confession. Her knees buckled and Marta, the loyal cook, rushed from the wings, steadying her before she fell. Gasps rippled through the crowd at the sight. the pregnant maid, fragile yet central, like a queen stripped of her crown. Samuel stepped forward, his face ashen but resolute. "Yes," he said, voice rising over the chaos. "You heard me. This child is mine." The room detonated. Some guests gasped loudly, others laughed in disbelief, some clutched their pearls like extras in a soap opera. "Mine," Samuel repeated, his eyes locked on Vivian, softer now. "And for months I let her suffer in silence. While you all believed Esther's story of charity, I let Vivian carry the weight of my cowardice." He turned, his gaze slicing through Esther. But no more. The hall was a storm. A film producer whispered gleefully, "This is better than television." A banker muttered, "Roberts just tanked his reputation." The Prime Minister's aide was already drafting a statement under the table. Phones were lifted high, recording every second. The scandal was live before the vows were even finished. "You filthy liar!" Esther screamed, lunging forward. She slapped Samuel across the face, the crack echoing like a gunshot. Gasps swept the crowd. "You think they'll believe you?" she spat. "You think anyone will side with a maid over me? I'll destroy her, and you." Her pearl necklace snapped as she thrashed, beads scattering like fallen teeth across the marble. She looked less like a bride and more like a queen stripped bare, claws unsheathed. Samuel didn't flinch. His cheek burned red, but his voice was steel. "They will believe me," he said coldly, "because for once I am telling the truth." He turned to the officiant, who stood pale and trembling with the abandoned script in hand. "This ceremony is over." The orchestra lowered their instruments. Guests surged to their feet, unsure whether to flee, to gossip, or to record the downfall of one of London's most powerful families. Vivian's tears spilled freely, but there was no relief, only fear. She clutched her stomach, whispering to the child inside her. She didn't want this spectacle. She hadn't asked for Samuel's protection, nor Esther's wrath. Yet here she stood, exposed, judged, her life altered forever. She staggered, nearly collapsing again, and Samuel moved toward her instinctively. But Esther blocked him, her arms spread like a barricade, her face twisted into a mask of rage. "You don't get to play savior now," Esther hissed. "You've ruined me. But I'll take her down with me before I let her rise." The guests were shouting, staff were panicking, and cameras were flashing like lightning. And then, amid the chaos, Vivian suddenly screamed, doubling over in pain. The room froze. Her hands clutched her belly, her breath ragged, her face pale. "The baby," she gasped. "It's happening." Silence fell again, thicker than before. Samuel's face drained of color. Esther's fury evaporated, replaced by shock. Guests leaned forward, horrified. And in that instant, the wedding wasn't just scandal. It was life or death. The scream that tore from Vivian's throat sliced through the ballroom like a siren. At once, the orchestra dropped their instruments, glasses shattered as guests bolted from their chairs, and Esther's perfectly choreographed wedding collapsed into chaos. Vivian clutched her stomach, sweat already beading on her brow, her breath sharp and shallow. "The baby, it's coming," she choked, her voice raw with pain. The wealthy elite, men in tailored tuxedos, women in silk gowns worth more than entire villages, sprinted like startled deer. A stockbroker toppled a champagne tower. An heiress fainted dramatically, caught by no one. One guest shouted, "Call an ambulance," while another muttered, No, keep recording, this is history." By the time someone dialed emergency services, half the guests had already posted shaky clips captioned #wedding from hell on Instagram. Within minutes, the scandal wasn't just a local disaster. It was trending worldwide. Samuel Roberts was no longer the billionaire groom. He was a man possessed. "Clear the floor," he bellowed, his voice slicing through the madness. "Give her space." Some obeyed, but others hesitated, reluctant to miss the spectacle. He turned on them with a fury that could level empires. "Move, or I will make you move." For the first time in decades, Samuel Roberts looked less like a tycoon and more like a soldier, a man ready to bulldoze through anyone to save Vivian and their child. But Esther was not retreating. Her veil had slipped, her mascara smeared, but her rage blazed brighter than ever. You won't parade her here like some saint. She spat, blocking Samuel's path. This is my wedding day. You think I'll let you cradle her like some heroine in front of them? Her jeweled fingers dug into his chest as if clawing through armor. If she gives birth here, Samuel, it'll be the final humiliation. The maid's bastard child delivered at my altar? Never. Her words hung venomous, but the universe did not wait for her permission. Vivian screamed again, clutching at Marta's arm, her knees buckling. Marta, the cook who had spent 20 years wiping the sweat of this family's empire from her brow, stepped into the spotlight. She glared at Esther, her voice low but lethal. You move, Senora, or I swear on my grave, I'll drag you by your pearls. The guests gasped, not because of her words, but because it was the first time any staff had ever defied Esther publicly. For once, Esther faltered. Vivian's voice, strained and weak, cut through the standoff. Please, Samuel, just help me. Her eyes, glassy with pain, locked onto his. The plea wasn't only for her, it was for the life kicking desperately inside her, demanding entry into a world already hostile. Samuel shoved Esther aside with a force that sent her stumbling, pearls rattling across the marble. Gasps erupted, but he didn't care. He knelt before Vivian, cradling her trembling body. I've got you, he whispered, his voice cracking. I won't fail you again. Suddenly, the glittering hall was no longer a wedding venue. It became a battlefield hospital. Tablecloths were ripped from dining tables to serve as sheets. A young guest training as a medical intern pushed forward, barking orders. She's in labor. Get her lying down. Somebody boil water. And stop filming, for God's sake. Of course, no one stopped filming. Vivian's screams echoed under the chandeliers, each contraction louder than the last. Her hands clawed at Samuel's as though anchoring herself to survival. Esther, staggering but unbroken, found her voice again. You'll regret this, she hissed, glaring at Samuel as if her fury alone could strike him dead. You think saving her will save you? The press will destroy you. The board will disown you. And me, she paused, teeth bared. I will not go quietly. Her laugh was hollow, jagged. Do you know what it looks like? A billionaire kneeling at the feet of a maid he impregnated, on the day he married someone else. Her words were poison, but Samuel did not rise. He stayed with Vivian, gripping her hand like a lifeline, drowning out the venom with whispers of comfort only she could hear. Outside the ballroom, news crews had already gathered, tipped off by guests. By the time paramedics pushed through the glass doors, CNN had gone live with a headline that burned across the globe. Billionaire's maid goes into labor at wedding. Robert's family implodes in scandal. Inside, Vivian writhed, the contractions crashing harder, closer, like tidal waves. Her hair clung to her damp forehead, her breath ragged. Samuel, she gasped, eyes rolling. Don't let them take my baby, don't let her. Her eyes flicked toward Esther. Samuel gripped her tighter. Over my dead body. Just as the paramedics reached Vivian's side, her body convulsed violently. A scream unlike any before tore through her lungs, and then silence. Her head fell back. The room froze. Was it exhaustion, or had her body given out under the weight of the scandal, the labor, and the cruelty of the night? Samuel's face drained of all color. He shook her, shouting her name, his voice breaking into sobs. Vivian, don't you dare leave me. Don't you dare. And all the while Esther stood watching, her lips curling into the faintest, most dangerous smile. The ballroom had gone silent, but it was the kind of silence that screams louder than thunder. Vivian's head lolled back against Samuel's arm, her eyes half closed, her chest frighteningly still. For one unbearable moment, the billionaire who had stared down senators, bankers, and oil barons now stared into the abyss of helplessness. Vivian, look at me. Open your eyes. Samuel's voice cracked, each syllable torn from his lungs. You don't get to leave me. Not like this. Not now. The double doors burst open with a slam, and two paramedics rushed in, red bags clattering against the marble. The crowd instinctively parted, as though Moses himself had commanded it, though some guests clutched their phones high, filming every second like vultures at a feast. One paramedic dropped to his knees beside Vivian. She's unresponsive, pulse faint, he barked. We need oxygen now. Another ripped open a kit, pulling out a mask and gloves. Samuel refused to let go of her hand, even when ordered. Sir, you need to step back. Samuel's eyes burned into the medic's. If I step back, she dies. Do your job, but I'm not moving. The medic hesitated, then nodded, too pressed for time to argue with a man who looked capable of tearing the oxygen tank in half with his bare hands. From across the hall, Esther's laughter sliced through the panic. Look at him, she sneered, her voice dripping venom. A billionaire on his knees, clinging to his maid like a dog to scraps. Tell me, Samuel, when the headlines roll, will they call it love or pity? Some guests gasped, others whispered, but no one dared confront her. Even in the shadow of disaster, Esther Roberts held her crown like a queen watching her enemies bleed. Marta, standing nearby, muttered loud enough for half the hall to hear. If sarcasm could deliver babies, maybe you'd finally be useful. The room broke into nervous laughter, quickly stifled when Esther's glare snapped toward the cook like a blade unsheathed. The oxygen mask slipped over Vivian's face, and seconds later, agonizing, eternal seconds, her chest rose. Then again. A ragged gasp escaped her lips. She's breathing, the paramedic shouted. Relief surged through the hall like a tide breaking a dam. Samuel bent low, tears streaming freely down his face, his forehead pressed against her damp hair. That's it, love. That's it. Stay with me. Just breathe. But the reprieve was fragile. Vivian's grip on his hand was weak, almost childlike. It hurts, she whispered, voice muffled under the mask. The baby, Samuel, it's too soon. Her words dissolved into another scream, her entire body convulsing. She's going into full labor, the medic yelled. We can't wait for transport. It's happening here. And just like that, the glittering Roberts ballroom became a makeshift maternity ward. Crystal chandeliers shone down like cruel spotlights, violins lay abandoned on the floor, and billionaires who had never lifted anything heavier than a Mont Blanc pen suddenly found themselves holding towels and buckets at the orders of frantic medics. Get her legs elevated. Someone boil water. No, don't just look at me, move. For the love of God, turn off that live stream. But no one turned it off. Outside, the hashtag Roberts wedding disaster climbed into Twitter's global top 5 trends. Clips of Samuel kneeling beside Vivian played in endless loops, each caption crueler than the last. From vows to veins, billionaire groom abandons bride for pregnant maid. Samuel Roberts, billionaire daddy on aisle 9. Esther's smile widened at the sight. To her, Vivian's survival didn't matter. The scandal already burned bright enough to scorch reputations beyond repair. Samuel's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. His lawyers, his board members, no doubt screaming about damage control. He ignored them. His entire world had shrunk to the trembling woman in his arms and the life fighting its way into existence. Stay with me, he whispered into Vivian's ear. You're stronger than this. Stronger than all of them. But doubt gnawed at him. Could she really survive the pressure? The labor, the humiliation, the world's hungry eyes? Or would this night end in double tragedy? Esther stepped forward again, pearls rattling as she adjusted her gown, her voice carrying over the medic's frantic commands. You think saving her will save you? She hissed, her eyes locked on Samuel. Even if she lives, you're finished. You'll lose the company. You'll lose the board. And when this bastard child screams its first cry, do you know what it will echo? Your downfall. Her words dripped poison, and though Samuel tried to block them out, they slid into his chest like knives. Vivian moaned, writhing, clutching his hand tighter than ever. Don't let her win, she gasped. Samuel bowed his head, tears falling into her hair. Never. Then a sound ripped through the hall, a cry. Tiny. Fragile. But unmistakably alive. The medics lifted the newborn, red and squirming, into the light. For a heartbeat, the entire room froze, as if time itself bowed to witness the moment. Samuel's breath caught. Vivian's weak smile flickered through her exhaustion. But before relief could bloom, Esther's voice rose again, cold and triumphant. That child will never bear the name Roberts. And the ballroom erupted into war. The newborns' cry echoed under the chandeliers, piercing through the stunned silence of the ballroom. It was fragile, raw, but undeniable. Life declaring itself in the middle of ruin. Vivian, drenched in sweat, reached weakly for the baby. "Please, let me see." The paramedic placed the child gently in her arms. Vivian's eyes flooded, her lips trembling as she pressed her cheek against the newborn's. "My baby," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're here." Samuel bent over them both, tears dripping onto the infant's blanket. For the first time, the ruthless billionaire looked stripped bare. Not Samuel Roberts the Empire, but Samuel the man, clinging to the two people who truly mattered. But Esther wasn't finished. She stalked forward, gown dragging like the train of a dark queen, her voice steady but venomous. "That child," she hissed, "will never carry the Roberts name. I will make sure of it. The board will see you as weak, the public as pathetic. You've humiliated me for the last time, Samuel." Her hand shot out toward the baby, and in that instant the world seemed to hold its breath. Before Esther's jeweled fingers could graze the infant, Marta stepped between them, wooden ladle still clutched in her hand like a weapon. "You touch that baby," she growled, "and you'll need more than pearls to stitch your face back together." The crowd gasped. Cameras clicked. The cook, the woman the Roberts family had ignored for decades, had become the shield between power and innocence. And for once Esther faltered. Samuel rose slowly, towering over Esther, his voice calm but deadly. "You want to destroy me?" His eyes blazed like fire through glass. "Fine. Take the company. Take the headlines. Take whatever scraps of empire you think will make you whole. But you will never take them." He gestured to Vivian and the child. His tone sharpened, every word a blade. "They are my family. Say what you want, do what you want, but if you come for them again, I will burn this empire to ashes and bury you in the rubble." The room went dead silent. Even the baby's cries softened, as if the child itself recognized the gravity of the vow. Esther laughed. High, bitter, manic. "You fool," she spat, though her voice cracked. "Without me, you're nothing. The board will." But the words caught in her throat. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the marble, her crown of pearls scattering around her like bones. Gasps erupted, guests rushing forward. For the first time, Esther Roberts was not the unshakable queen. She was just a woman unraveling, the weight of humiliation and betrayal crushing her like stone. The paramedics ignored her collapse. Their focus remained on Vivian and the child. And then, amid the chaos, the newborn let out another cry. Vivian, her strength nearly gone, whispered to Samuel. "Her name. She needs her name." Samuel leaned in, voice trembling. "What should it be?" Vivian looked up at him, a faint smile flickering across her exhausted face. "Call her Esther." The room froze. Even the real Esther, still on the floor, snapped her head toward Vivian, eyes wide with shock. Vivian's smile was faint but deliberate. Not after her, but as a reminder that no matter the cruelty, love will carry the name and rewrite it. The irony cut deeper than any sword. The child of scandal, of betrayal, of chaos, would carry Esther's name, but on Vivian's terms. As dawn broke through the ballroom's glass walls, reporters shouted from outside, headlines already flooding the world. But inside, Samuel wrapped his arms around Vivian and their newborn, while Marta stood guard beside them like a lioness. Esther lay broken, her crown scattered, her legacy slipping through her fingers. And as the cameras flashed, Samuel whispered the words that would etch themselves into history. "She is Esther Roberts. But this time she belongs to love, not to power."